Welcome to the Top of Mind podcast from Altos Research. This is the show where we talk to real estate industry insiders and experts about the trends shaping the market today. Enjoy the show. Mike Simonsen here. Thanks for joining me today. Welcome to the Top of Mind podcast. If you follow along with Altos Research, you're familiar with our weekly real estate market data video series. With the Top of Mind podcast, we seek to add context to the discussion about what's happening in the market from leaders in the industry. Each week, of course, Altos Research tracks every home for sale in the country, all the pricing, all the supply and demand, all the changes in that data. And we make the insights available to you before you see it in the traditional channels. People really need to know what's happening in the housing market right now. So if you need to understand the housing market or communicate about this market to others, go to altosresearch.com and just book a free report. Connect with our team. Let's review your local market and teach you how to use market data in your business. So today I have a guest I'm really excited about talking with. We're going to talk housing market and a whole bunch of other things. Dr. Daryl Fairweather. Dr. Daryl Fairweather is the chief economist with Redfin and the author of a terrific new book called Hate the Game, which is a very personal memoir and pop culture approach to teaching useful economic concepts. At Redfin, she analyzes the U.S. housing market and consumer behavior. She's a member of the advisory council of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas and was a former senior economist at Amazon before she joined Redfin. She's a regular contributor to Forbes, and she's been featured on 60 Minutes, Today, the New York Times, Bloomberg, a bunch of other media sites. She has a degree from MIT and a PhD from the University of Chicago, where she was the first Black woman to receive a PhD from that school's vaunted economics program. And that fact is mind-blowing to me, and we're going to talk about it today and that experience a bit because it's featured in her book. We'll talk about the housing market too, of course, and Daryl has such a command of the data and on the outlook, and she offers some surprising takes on what might be coming in the future. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Dr. Daryl Fairweather, Redfin chief economist. Dr. Daryl Fairweather, welcome to the Top of Mind podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's really great. It's been a long time. I've loved to have you on for a long time, but this is the first time we've actually been able to make it happen. So I got lots to cover today. But let's start with the book, the Hate the Game book. Tell us about the book and why you decided to write it. Let's talk about the book to begin with.
Sure. So the book contains a lot of advice that is rooted in economics for anybody who's trying to achieve their economic or financial or career goals. I go through things like how to apply for a job, how to get promoted, how to deal with workplace conflict, but also there's a lot on the housing market because I am a housing market economist. So I go through how to buy a home and how to sell a home. And throughout the whole book, I try to add in context for why the economy is the way it is, why the housing market is the way it is, because I think knowing how we got here helps people navigate the economy better and feel more empowered about the decisions that they're making.
Yeah, and I thought it was really a terrific way that you told the story. It's a memoir. It's a personal memoir about your journey, and which has some really remarkable elements in it. That the first Black woman to get a PhD from the University of Chicago. It's like mind-blowing that is the case. And you had some really great personal stories and also some great pop culture references in how you tell the story. So while we're on the topic of the University of Chicago, one of my favorites in there was your story about how, when you go into that PhD program at Chicago, it's like day one is you got to be in a study group, otherwise you will not succeed. But you had some really interesting takeaways on that, and it was a great story for economic principles, but also talked about the Survivor TV show. So tell me that story again, because I thought it was really super vivid and compelling.
Sure. So I got my PhD at the University of Chicago, which is pretty notorious for being one of the toughest, or if not the toughest, program for economists. You have to take this test at the end of your first year called the qualifying exams. And if you don't pass the test, you either have to repeat the first year again or drop out. And about a third of people are in that situation. So it's very competitive from the get that like not everybody is going to pass, not everybody is going to make it. And they made the homework so difficult that you had to be in a study group to complete it. They recommended heavily that you are in a study group of no more than 5 people. But what happened on like the first day of classes is people started to break off into study groups that they had already pre-formed, because I guess they knew ahead of time about this rule or this recommendation. And even though the program was mostly international students, so it was diverse in that way, there were, few women. I think it was maybe like 20% women, less than 30%. And I noticed that there was a study group of all white American men. And I did the math on like what the probability would be of 5 white American men being in the same study group if, race, gender, and nationality had nothing to do with it. And it was very low. It was like less than 2%. So very statistically significant chance that either race, gender, or nationality or something associated with it, correlated with it, had to do with how these study groups were formed, which I think isn't, and I'm not calling these people necessarily prejudiced, but it's this natural inclination that people have to want to team up with people who remind them of themselves, who they have a good rapport with, who maybe have a similar background to them. And when you're in a minority, you're just at an inherent disadvantage. And another place that I saw this show up was on the reality TV show Big Brother. This probably happens in Survivor too, but there's a good example in Big Brother because for the longest time, Black contestants never won that show, even though like statistically there should have been a probability that they won after all these years. But once they had an episode or a season where they had more than 6 Black contestants, they all formed an alliance together, and all 6 Black house guests in this show made it to the final 6, which would have been very unlikely for them all to make it in that way, especially after this history of them not winning the show at all. And I think it's a good example to show that like being in the minority in and of itself is a disadvantage, because it might mean that you're on the outs when it comes to things like alliances or study groups.
Yeah, and I thought it was particularly useful because it is so easy to do the wrong causality inference at the other side. Black people never won Big Brother because whatever it was.
Yeah, they're worse at it, or they're inferior, or whatever. Yeah, that's
right. And
that's the conclusion
so
some
like
people
showing
come to.
it was like actually a mechanism of how the group formed on day one, and which was the similar path that you went through in grad school. And I thought it was, it sounded like you had professors at Chicago who were still falling victim to the easy thinking about the causality there.
Yeah, there are so many economists who feel like you need to prove racial discrimination beyond like any kind of doubt in your studies and your research in order for it to be real. And simple correlations, correlation doesn't equal causality. I feel like they take that to the extreme when talking about racial discrimination or gender discrimination. It's kind of like a way to shut down conversations about it. And it's also just an easy out. Like if you assume that the reason things are the way they are is because that's just the natural order of things and you don't have to do anything about it or acknowledge that things might be unfair.
Really eye-opening stuff. Really great. You also had a great story about Beyonce and Destiny's Child and game theory. That was the whole book. I should tell people the whole book is like, there are concepts like game theory and concepts like, the cognitive biases that we experience. And you do a great job with applying the either a pop culture reference or your personal journey to explaining these. And it's a super fun way to read it. So I super enjoyed it. So tell me about how Beyonce teaches me about game theory.
Yeah, so there's this. I mean, if you know about Beyonce, you probably know this story, but maybe your audience doesn't know Beyonce as deeply as I do. So back in the early 2000s, Beyonce was part of this girl group called Destiny's Child. There were 4 members. They put out their first album and it was pretty successful. They had like a couple of hits and they were just starting to really gain notoriety. But Beyonce was already breaking out as the star. I mean, she was the one singing lead. She was the one that everybody wanted to have interviews with and take photos of. But the other members of the group, Latavia and Latoya, they felt like she was getting unfair treatment because her dad was the manager of the group, her dad, Matthew Knowles. So they issued an ultimatum to the Beyonce and the group that it was either them or the manager. And this is like a classic game theory example, an ultimatum. An ultimatum is like a take it or leave it offer. And you would think that if it's take it or leave it, the person being issued the ultimatum is really in a tough spot and they'd rather appease the person giving the ultimatum than give in. But I think what Latavia and Latoya misunderstood was that the group, it wasn't really take it or leave it. The group, Destiny's Child, was going to survive without them because Beyonce really was the star of the group and whoever was singing backup really was interchangeable. They didn't realize how replaceable they were in the group. And that's an example of asymmetric information where you don't know what the other people you're negotiating against really value. Like you don't have all the upper hand that you might think you have. And this came up for me early in my career when I went to go negotiate with my boss, and I thought that I was hitting him at a very inopportune time because another economist had already quit who was working on a project that I was the only economist working on. So I figured like, he needs to treat me better and like pay me more because I'm doing all this extra work, and if I quit, he's going to have a real problem. But he didn't give me a raise because I think that ultimately what he valued was having an employee who was going to do what she was told, who wasn't going to ask for more out of the situation. So at that point I realized like, oh, this is not the job that I thought it was. There's not the opportunities here that I thought there were, and I'm not getting like the respect that I thought that I was getting. So I had to swallow that pill and go look for another job at that point.
Yeah. That and your journey and those, it's really fun in the book where you're like, this is the job negotiation I did, and here's how it turned out, and here's when it succeeded and when it failed. That's what's really great. You mentioned when you start the book that it was Freakonomics, Stephen Levitt's book from 20 years ago that
20 years ago.
That sent you on your journey into economics. That your dad gave you the book, and so my daughter is graduating from college like this week, and so I've got my copy to take with me
Great.
and hand to her to hopefully give her some of that same inspiration. We'll switch into housing. So the book is terrific, and but obviously you are the chief economist of Redfin and a housing economist. We're going to talk about the housing market in a sec. One thing I want to ask you about is that book, Freakonomics, famously has the study or the data about how realtors are overcharging you. And I've watched that, and that's the one that people have been citing for ever since that came out the door as justification on how as their evidence that realtors are overcharging. Has that study for you, because you're a big fan of that book and obviously the authors, has that study for you held up over time? Or do you have a different perspective?
Yeah, I thought about including it in the book, but I ultimately did not include it in the book because I felt like it was specific to the nature of the real estate market back then, because the book is 20 years old. It was about what was going on in the housing market in the early 2000s. And the conclusion of the research was that agents will keep their own homes on the market longer than they would and market it for longer than if it was a client that they were representing. But nowadays, having your home sit on the market longer is not a good strategy. I don't know if it was a good strategy back then, but I wouldn't expect to see that same dynamic today. I don't dispute that an agent is probably going to care more and maybe take more care to sell their own home than a client of theirs, because there is that principal agent problem where, maybe the agent is working with multiple clients and they have to balance the needs of all their clients. Or nowadays, like a thing I would worry about is dual representation. Like if an agent is actually working for both sides, then maybe they're going to treat things differently than if they're only working for one side. So I think that those issues exist, but the paper and the conclusions of the paper, I would like to see it repeated, because I don't know if you would find that same result or you'd find a different result in the way that agents behave.
Yeah, and the one that always struck out with me there is that agents representing themselves versus representing a client is that they're likely optimizing for different things. Mm-hmm. Very often, a client is optimizing for, let's sell this house as quickly as I can, where an agent is saying, wow, I have the luxury of taking time. And so it was always a fascinating one. And it came out before I was doing housing data too. So it was really, but it certainly plays into people's preconceptions, their biases there on that. So that would be great to check. So that's cool. So it wasn't until late in your book, that you really started discussing housing and buying a home. What did you want your readers to take away from the housing market and real estate messages in the book?
Yeah, so I think I first talked about housing in chapter 4 or 5. So, and that's when I start talking about when I was selling and buying my first homes. Because I think that usually is, nowadays people are buying their first home later and later in life. And when you're just trying to get your career in a good place, I don't think that you should really be too concerned about what's going on in the housing market. Like, just find a place to rent that you can afford within your budget, that's going to get you to the job, that's going to get you on the right career path to earn enough money where you can buy a home. But then when you're older and you're like more secure in your job, you don't think you're going to move around too much, you're not going to quit your job and go move to a different city like you might do in your early career, then it is important to start thinking about those trade-offs between buying and renting, because if you buy, you have the opportunity to build equity. If you stay in the home for long enough, you're going to be on a path to build more equity than if you were renting. There's ways to offset that if you were to invest in the stock market, but generally that's the time that most people are thinking about buying a home. And I think a lot of people, because you don't have this experience in the housing market, it's this really big purchase, there's all these emotions involved. It's a time where people are prone to make mistakes that can be very costly to them if they end up overpaying for a home or picking a home that they aren't going to stay in long term. So I go through all the different biases you should watch out for when you're buying a home, like falling in love with it too quickly, or engaging in herding behavior, basically doing what everybody else is doing, or just getting tired and then letting that weigh on your ability to make decisions. All of that can lead to a bad choice when it comes to selecting your first home.
Yeah, those are some really great lessons in there. Again, as applied, but with your journey from San Diego to Seattle to Wisconsin, of all places.
Yeah, that's right.
How's Wisconsin right now?
It's beautiful. This is the best time to be here, because it's the beginning of vacation season. I live in a seasonal town, like a vacation area on a lake. So this is when the place I live in really comes to life, and there's just stuff to do every single week. That's great. Super. Yeah, I love Lake Geneva.
Okay, so let's switch now into housing market and this year. And the book is terrific, and I encourage everybody to read it. It was a lot of fun. And like I said, I'm handing it to my daughter next week when we go to graduation. But let's switch into the housing market. And let's start big. Let's talk the big themes of 2025 that you find compelling.
Yes. Well, the big theme of 2025, I think, is just disappointment, because we were forecasting that sales were going to grow, that mortgage rates were going to fall, and that this was going to be the year that we start to climb ourselves out of this rock bottom hole we've been in since halfway through 2023, but that didn't happen. Mortgage rates stayed high. Now we have this tariff war causing a bunch of economic uncertainty, and the Federal Reserve, just today they said that they're not going to cut rates and that they're going to really keep their eye on the ball in terms of inflation. So none of that is good for the housing market. I think the only silver lining is that the housing market has already been through so much. There really isn't that much more. Like it's already dead. You can stop kicking it now, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because like there's not much more for it to fall. And homeowners have a lot of equity. They have excellent credit scores. They're not going underwater on their homes. But it is unfortunate that affordability is still so bad and home sales are still so low.
And if you think about the equity and affordability trade-off, like if home prices adjust down, that would eat up some equity, but also would get us back into slightly more affordable conditions. Which of those do you see as more dominant forces for the year? Do you think, for example, if we go into a recession, we got a bunch of equity, does housing help us out or survive a recession? Or are we looking at the other side of it where it's the affordability means we got to buy fewer homes? And how do you balance out those competing conditions?
I think that what's going to happen is that buyers are going to exit the for sale market and go to the rental market because it is cheaper to rent right now compared to owning a home. Renting gives you more flexibility. If you lose your job, it's easier to get out of a lease than it is to sell your house. So that will push more people into the rental market. It will probably push up rents starting next year. And then once that rent versus own gap starts to narrow, more people will start thinking, well, maybe now is a better time to buy, or like I don't want my rent to increase. Maybe I'm gonna buy a home at that point. But it will probably take a couple of years for that to really go through. And then in the interim, like, yes, rents will go up and prices will probably come down. I think that prices will probably come down really slowly, like come down in real terms, meaning they go up slower than inflation. Maybe we'll see prices in nominal terms, like just the sticker price go down maybe 1 or 2%, but I don't think it's going to go down as much as people who think there's a housing bubble are anticipating that it would. Maybe we'll have 2 years of like negative 1% price growth, which isn't enough for, I think, anybody to really get nervous about. But it does mean that people aren't gaining equity in that time, which is unfortunate for people who bought at the top of the market.
They're not getting equity from growth, but they're get a little bit of equity paying off the mortgage.
Yeah, like the way that housing probably should work, where you just pay down your mortgage and you're not banking on it going up in value every year.
Yeah. So interesting that you think that maybe that would drive rents up next year. In our data, we're measuring rents actually down year over year right now, negative. So you think that a shift in demand would potentially drive rents up in 2026?
Yeah, this year I think it's going to keep stable or even fall a little bit because there is a lot of vacant inventory in the rental market. We're at the tail end of a boom in construction that started during the pandemic. But then when you look at permits, it's way down for permits. So I think that those vacancies are probably going to fill up this year. And then once they're filled up, then we'll start to see more pressure on prices.
Got it. Yeah. So some of the negative right now is from the overhang of the construction during the pandemic, and that definitely dries up after this year.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Well, that's nice. I like it when we get some nice, clear forecasts about things that will happen in the future. Well, let's talk. So I think we're generally of the same view. Home prices could be flat or tick down 1% for the year, and that there doesn't seem like there's any evidence or any signal that we'll have a major price correction. Give me a quick take on why you think that is the case.
Well, the construction boom is ending, so we're not really going to get much new supply after this year. Homeowners themselves have still near record levels of equity in their homes. They're not close to being underwater. When these people bought homes, they bought with large down payments, with excellent credit scores. So they're not the kind of people that would enter into a short sale. And usually you need to see distressed sales, at least of some kind, in order for prices to come down. Because if sellers aren't in distress, they're not going to accept prices that are lower, and they'll just simply not list their homes versus list them. And they have really cheap mortgages from the pandemic too, which gives them an even greater reason to not sell if they're not getting the prices that they want. So I think that's going to keep prices sticky. Mostly in the single family home market. In condos, that's a bit more fluid because it's so easy for a buyer to tell the difference between how much it costs to buy a condo versus rent an apartment because they're so interchangeable. You might find a unit for sale and a unit for rent in the same exact building. So we're already seeing corrections in the condo market, but single family homes I think are going to be stickier than that.
Great. That's excellent insight. If no distressed sales, therefore no major price declines. And really, I buy that, and there's nobody distressed. Although there are, I guess, there's a couple of segments like FHA borrowers that are kind of distressed. Do you have any take on what any implications there?
Well, actually, I think that the people who are more in distress are people whose insurance premiums are going up. And we're seeing that in Florida and in Texas. Also, HOA fees going up. That is just another whammy for the condo market. So yeah, when the costs of owning your home increase, then that puts people in distress. But most people, well, at least a good portion of housing costs are fixed for most people because they have fixed rate mortgages and property taxes don't go up all that quickly. But the insurance market is much more variable in these places that have experienced a lot of disasters.
Yeah. Okay. That's a nice insight. It's it's really, obviously Florida and Texas are where the inventory is building the most rapidly. And those are the places where we've seen that kind of, those kind of adjustments. Okay. That's terrific. So let's talk a little bit more about the macroeconomy and consumer behavior. I know you spend a lot of time on consumer behavior. What data should we be paying attention to? And what are your expectations for the year in a macro sense? And do you have any particular view of recession risks or inflation or those kind of things?
I think it's pretty clear that the economy is going to be weaker because of these tariffs. But what's unclear and why I think people are hesitating to say that there's absolutely going to be a recession is that the economy was really strong going into this. And even right now where the tariffs are in effect, but we have some lagging data on employment, the employment numbers look good right now, which is, I think it's confusing for forecasters because it's like we have this nice cushion for the crash, but it doesn't mean that the cushion is going to be enough to stop a crash from happening. And I think that's why Jerome Powell today was kind of hesitant to say anything about which way the economy is going, because I think since the pandemic, we've just been in really uncharted territory when it comes to the economy. And we might be more resilient than we have been in the past to shocks because of what we've already been through. It's kind of like what I was saying with the housing market. Like the housing market didn't crash when interest rates went up. It's probably not going to crash that they stay high. And that might be true for the labor market. Like if the labor market wasn't destroyed during the pandemic, maybe it could survive a tariff war. But I think part of me feels like that's kind of magical thinking, and we should be really talking about the very real possibility that this is like it was the last time when we had stagflation, where prices go up, unemployment goes up, and we're just all collectively poorer because of it. I think that still is true no matter what, that we're going to be collectively poorer because of the tariffs. It's just like, are we going to be poorer than we were last year? That's still up in the air.
Right. Is it okay? Right. Like none of the signals are good for the economy, but we started good. And I think it is important to note things like to keep eyes on employment numbers, which are still really good, with the exception of the hiring rate, I suppose, which is very low. But everybody's employed still. Maybe some slight increases in unemployment.
Yeah, and the people who are going to be unemployed are probably not the people who are in the market for buying a home in the first place, which is just a reason to think that the housing market will be resilient through all of this. I think the housing market is in the part that's hardest for it, where we have high mortgage rates and a lot of economic uncertainty. If we move into a phase where it's just economic uncertainty, but the economic uncertainty is so bad that unemployment is going up, then rates start falling, and then you get this positive effect from rates. So I feel like we're kind of already in the worst of it for the housing market. But we could stay in this worst of it period for longer than what any of us are really comfortable with.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've been hoping to get out of the worst of it for 2.5 years now.
Yeah.
Okay. And on the consumer side, there are some weaknesses showing up, right? So credit card debt and automotive and things like that. And I think default rates are up. What do we think about? What should I think about on consumers?
Yeah, also Beyonce is apparently not selling out her concerts. It's a very concerning statistic.
That is concerning. That is concerning.
And yeah, like another things are like that, like Las Vegas is reporting layoffs and fewer people going. Those are all like just signs that people are cutting back on their spending. They're not engaging in luxury purchases. In the housing market, there's this $40,000 gap between what homes are listed for and what they're actually selling for. And yet the homes that are selling still for like 99% of their listed price. What's happening is that the expensive homes aren't selling at all. And I think that is a sign that people are scaling back on luxury purchases. They're not going for the big homes with swimming pools that cost more than the median for the neighborhood. They really want something more practical. And I think that is a reflection of consumer sentiment.
Do you have any fears about like that, the consumer financial situation worsens or, like drags us down or bleeds over into housing?
Well, yeah, I could definitely see that happening. Like if people can't afford to pay for their groceries or pay for their car insurance or whatever costs are going to go up with these tariffs, then people are going to start missing rent payments or mortgage payments. On the rent payment side, that would result in like more evictions, but also property managers and landlords being more reluctant themselves to buy homes. And then that would in turn drive down home values, which would, not be good for homeowners. But like I said before, homeowners have so much equity that they could probably suffer a reduction in their home value without really entering into widespread financial distress. And then at that point, like if people are missing their rent payments because they can't afford groceries, then I think we might be in a scenario where the Fed does start to cut rates.
Right.
But maybe they won't be able to if inflation is so bad. Like if we're in this place where inflation is getting worse at the same time that people are in financial distress and not able to make their rent, then they might not be able to cut. And that could just be bad overall for everybody.
Yeah. Okay, and so as you mentioned, they didn't cut today. That they were recording this. Is your take on the likelihood of Fed cuts sort of low for the year? Does it seem like unlikely to get cuts later in the year, or does it seem like the likelihood is increasing?
I think that there is a large tail risk of a cut because with the dollar being so devalued, like there's this kind of lingering risk out there that there's going to be some kind of financial collapse because like we've never really been in this territory of the dollar being devalued at the same time that the stock market is down and rates are up. Like you don't usually see that unless foreign investors are just pulling their money out of the US, which is what's happening. So if foreign investors keep pulling their money out of the US, then it might precipitate some kind of financial crisis. That means the Fed has to like step in and do something really quickly. It might be like more of a Silicon Valley Bank collapse situation where rates fell for a little bit and the Fed like did some stopgaps, but then right after that they had to raise rates again. It kind of depends on how severe things get in the near term, but it's definitely on the table that something severe happens really quickly. When rates fall, they tend to fall all at once. And also if we get a print that says that unemployment's up, I think the Fed would cut rates at that point.
Got it. Okay. So that's a really interesting take. Like the severe risk is really elevated right now and the crisis risk and in a crisis, we'd see rates fall.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's terrific. So it's May. It's the peak of the home buying season. And of course, you guys at Redfin have tremendous data, really great insight on things. So what's the data saying like right now? And we're here recording sort of in early-ish May.
Yeah, I mean, right now we're seeing upticks in inventory, upticks in new listings, but unfortunately, like we're not really seeing that same thing come through in terms of homes for sale. So new listings are up 6% year over year, active listings are up 14% year over year, but pending sales are down about 3%, and this is in the trailing 4 weeks, which shows that buyers are really backing off in this moment. Like before, and last year, seeing that kind of increase in inventory, I think would have resulted in more sales because one of the constraints on the market was that there wasn't enough homes for sale for people who wanted to buy them. The market wasn't thick enough for buyers to find homes that were a good match for them. And that part is starting to alleviate, but the buyers still aren't coming back because mortgage rates are still so high because of all this economic uncertainty. So yeah, I think we're just starting to see buyers backing off more than sellers have. Like before we saw it was kind of imbalanced because of this mortgage rate lock-in effect of sellers. That's starting to weaken, but buyers are not coming back the same way sellers are.
Yeah, your pending data is down 3% year over year.
Yeah, for the last 4
basically
weeks.
for April.
Yeah, yeah.
We measured a little bit of gains in sales at the beginning of
Okay.
April, but that evaporated at the end of April in our data.
Yeah.
Do you think? You guys have leading indicators that you look at for like what May and June look like based on what you're seeing? Like, do you see
Yeah,
any?
so we have our Redfin home buyer demand index, which is based on home tours and people asking for home buying services from Redfin agents, and that is down 2% year over year.
Interesting. Okay. The mortgage bankers, the purchase applications are up year over year, and they've been up for like a couple of months in a row. Do you ever think about or try to reconcile that with your pending sales rate?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely look at that as a leading indicator, but one thing it doesn't capture is all cash purchases, and those have been coming down recently. So that might be one of the reasons that we're seeing more mortgage applications is because fewer people are initially buying in cash. Like a lot of the times people do that and they refinance later, but then that would show up in the refinance figures. So, yeah, I mean, it's not up so much that it makes me think that it's like out of bounds. I feel like the real answer is probably that we're around flat in terms of sales, which is not great either.
Yeah, another year at 4 million home sales.
Yeah.
Yeah. And is there anything in the data that looks like that's going to pick up?
No. I was really trying to have this discussion with the other economists on the team. Like, why are we so pessimistic? Like, we're more pessimistic than that we think home sales are going to keep falling from here on out. And I was trying to say, like, well, why do we think they're really going to fall from here on out? Like, aren't things as bad as they can get? But the thing is that we're starting to see other leading indicators of buyers backing off of the market in terms of canceled sales, like falling out of escrow, and sellers having to give more concessions to buyers in order to get deals across the finish line. So for people who are currently like in process of buying a home, we're seeing jitters there, which is probably indicative of people who are even searching for a home having jitters. And if people searching for a home have jitters, they're going to be less likely to follow through and make an offer. So that's why we think it's gonna keep growing this tariff effect over the next coming months.
Yeah. Have you okay? And you think some of those jitters are they're like, I still have a job and I would like to change, but now I'm worried about whatever macro things. I'm worried about future jobs, even though I'm well employed now. Those kind of worries.
Yeah, if you listen to any personal finance influencer on Instagram or TikTok, they're all saying don't make a major purchase right now. Like save your cash so you have money for your 6-month emergency fund. And I think people are listening to that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, so what other data do you like? So you have the Redfin, the buyer demand index. So you've got like zillions of people on the website. You got people booking open homes. Like that's really interesting like buyer data. What else do you look at to think about for like future signals? Like what happens the rest of the year? What happens? What do you like to look for?
Well, yeah, we have the Redfin Home Buyer Index. We're trying to create a new measure right now of the number of buyers on the market, kind of like active buyers, and we're using data on how long people are engaging in their search for, and like using that to extrapolate based on like how many offers we see, like how many buyers are in the pipeline, and we're like preliminarily seeing decreases in that number right now. That there are fewer buyers in the market.
The
But
fewer
we'll come up with
buyers are
that.
taking longer.
Yeah, they're taking longer, but they're fewer of them collectively. The same way that new listings kind of is an input to active listings. Fewer buyers are entering in. They're exiting. Well, they're exiting faster from the market if they're not going to make a purchase at all, and it's taking them longer to find a home when they do. But like still collectively, there are fewer of them.
Fascinating. That's a cool one. That would be really neat to be able to estimate.
Yeah,
the number
check in
of
for that in the coming weeks.
Awesome. I will pay attention to that. That's great. So that's a good view of the housing market. I think we're largely aligned. I've still been holding out hope that, our May sales and May and June sales, if we get lucky and rates tick down a little bit, do we maybe see year over year growth? Because last May and June were so weak, right? Last May and June was when rates really jumped. Any sign of that? Like at least we get year over year, like we get low comps, and so it's easy to get growth numbers?
I think if we get an announcement that the U.S. and China have agreed on a trade deal, then like it's even better than what we had before. Like it's even easy. We have like this even better relationship somehow coming out of it. Then maybe we erase all of the trade war worries and rates fall, and we get back to the scenario that we were forecasting in December. But I think it would take like a major reversal in policy, which I'm not saying is off the table because like crazier things have happened. But in terms of the recession scenario, I think that will take longer to play out. And also, I mean, yeah, I think that would take longer to play out. And by the time it does play out, we're probably going to be into late summer, past the peak of home buying season, and probably too late to see it growth, or at least, substantial growth in home sales
for the year. Yeah. Okay. I appreciate the outlook. It's good. It roughly fits with our view, but you have some really great data there. So at Redfin, I really appreciate your take on it. Let's switch to another topic you do a lot of writing and talking on, which is millennials, and the much maligned millennial demographic. Are the millennials going to like finally start to get to buy more houses than the boomers? Like when do we get the millennial boost, and how long does it last? And what should we know about millennials right now?
Well, millennials, like demographically, are the biggest generation out there, and they should be the ones that are buying homes. But according to data from NAR, the median age of a first-time home buyer is 38 now, which I guess is still a millennial, but it's a pretty old millennial. About like the millennials who were in position to buy a home during the pandemic, they got into homeownership, they got in at really good rates, and they are, I think, like overall doing well. They gained equity, especially if they bought early on in the pandemic. But the millennials that weren't positioned to buy a home and now have to deal with these really high rates, and they're not getting any younger, obviously, like I feel like they are going to be renting even longer than what they would have had it not been for the pandemic. Like if they had a more stable path, maybe they would have had a better chance, but the door was open and now the door got closed shut, unfortunately.
Yeah. So then do you have a take on like, is that therefore pent up demand? Like, are they, as soon as things improve a little bit, are those folks going to flood back in? Or some other behavior? What do you think?
They might rent longer, which would still, translate to more demand for housing. It's just that it would be their landlords who own the homes, not them. Because I think they are a big generation. They're gonna be growing their families. They're going to need more space for their families, but at these affordability levels, maybe they'll have to settle for something smaller. Unfortunately, there aren't really good options there for housing that is smaller. I mean, townhomes are great, but they're not legal to build everywhere. Condos oftentimes are just 1 bedroom or 0 bedrooms because it's so much more costly for developers to put in an extra bedroom and bathroom. So, yeah, I think that for some of them, the solution might be moving somewhere cheaper if they're able to, or just keep renting something similar to an apartment, like just renting an apartment in an expensive city if they can't relocate.
Have you spent any time with, speaking of relocation and moving to different cities, have you spent any time with the migration data, the north to south, moving to the Sun Belt? And if so, do you have takeaways for me to think about in that?
Well, in general, people are leaving the more expensive areas for the more affordable areas. That's always been the trend. During the pandemic, everybody was moving to Texas and Florida, but those housing markets are not doing as well. I mean, part of it is that they built so much because of all the demand they were getting, and that demand just wasn't really sustainable because of, the nature of working remotely. That's just kind of faded a bit. I mean, it's still way more popular than it was before the pandemic, but it's not as popular as it was during the pandemic. We're seeing more demand for housing now in the Midwest and some of the cheaper Northeast cities like Philadelphia, Newark. But it's not that people are moving into those places. It's that it's still affordable to buy homes on a local salary there because homes there just aren't as expensive as they are in other parts of the country. So it seems to be more locals driving that demand than people moving in. And demand for housing in California has recovered a bit because of return to office, I think, is supporting that, especially in San Jose. So I feel like migration isn't like the dominating story this year. People tend to not really move when the economy is not doing well because it's expensive to move. So that is probably playing a role too.
Yeah, we the way I've been viewing that, the north to south, those inexpensive Midwest or Northeast cities is like it got really expensive to move, and we've been selling our house in Connecticut and buying in Florida for 15 years, and now we're not doing that move, but there's still the young family who wants to buy in Connecticut, and they are, but they used to buy from the guy who just moved to Florida. But that guy's not moving right now, and so the inventory is still super tight there. Do you see those markets maybe getting a little more a little more supply, a little more new listing volume
in the Midwest and the Northeast? I mean,
yeah.
I think it's easier to build. It kind of depends on the city, but I think that there's still room to build in a lot of those places, and they don't have like the same barriers to building as they do on the coast. So I think that like they have a bit more of an opportunity to expand their supply, although new construction is way down right now just because of the nature of interest rates and tariffs and all of that. So it could be a while before their prices start to stabilize again. Because usually the Midwest and Northeast are very stable in their price growth, but recently we've seen double-digit increases in some of these metros.
Yeah, I have a friend who has an investment property in suburban Chicago, and he said, I've had that house for 20 years, and for 18 years, prices didn't go anywhere, and suddenly it's 30% more expensive in the last couple of years. It's really fascinating. Let's switch to long-term future. Tell me about like the second half of the decade, and like, what do you think about the housing market and the housing economy and the demographic shifts and stuff? Like, what should we look for, and are there big trends that like that we're not talking about yet, or what do you like to focus on?
Well, I mean, eventually we're going to get past this millennial wave of housing demand. Probably sometime in 2030, we'll start to feel that fade. And I think at that point, like the culture around owning a home is probably going to shift. Like if it's not a guarantee that your home's going to go up in value because, there's demographic pressure on it, then I think people will start to view their home is something that they pay a mortgage down on to build equity and not something that goes up in value that gets them equity. And then it becomes a bit like, I think, a different trade-off between owning a home versus renting. Renting could start to become more popular if people don't see home ownership as this vessel for investment anymore. And yeah, I think we'll start to maybe see more lifelong renters at that point. But if interest in renting goes up, then, the pendulum will start to shift back too, because then owning a home won't be as expensive. And, some people are just going to prefer to own a home because they want the autonomy. They want control over their house and they don't want to pay for someone else to maintain it. And I think that is like the trade-off that we should have between owning versus renting, is just like, is this something that you desire to own for intrinsic reasons versus like another asset to invest in? Now, all of that, I think, could change if the demographics shift. Our demographic destiny is not a destiny. It's a choice. That's a function of immigration, too. Like, there's no reason that our population has to decline after the millennial wave. But the way things are headed right now, it seems like that is the direction that we're going in, that we'll have fewer households a decade from now. But that could change.
Yeah,
it's hard to predict out a decade.
That's a pretty fascinating view, though. So if we get a cultural shift that says, wow, it's now been since 2023 and home prices really haven't climbed in 7, 8, 10 years, what does that mean for my daughter who's, 22 now, 21, 22, and graduating college? And does it shift assumptions about what it means to own a home?
Yeah, and also insurance costs going up and climate change being this other risk. I think it's going to make people think of home ownership as not the safest thing to do. I mean, not that it's a bad thing to do, but I think people got really comfortable with this idea that if you buy a home, that means your housing costs are fixed, which is to a certain extent true if you have a fixed rate mortgage, but property taxes can go up and insurance can go up. But there have been forces at play, especially in states like California, that cap those expenses. And that's not going to be sustainable. So once those other expenses go up, I think people are going to start to view homeownership as not the thing that fixes their housing costs forever.
That would be amazing. An amazing, like, tremendous shift in the zeitgeist. It would also take some, like in California, take some real legislative changes because of how the state likes to keep the taxes ultra low, and that would be really a fascinating thing. Although I do notice in our numbers, California inventory is up like 50% year over year right now. Like there's not a ton of homes. It's still not back to 2019 levels, but it's still, inventory is climbing in California.
Yeah. Well, I think that's definitely a good thing.
Yeah.
That inventory is climbing in California. I know they've had a lot of legislative change to make it easier to build dense housing there. It'll probably take a while for that to play out. And that's probably not the reason inventory is going up. Inventory is probably going up just because like the lock-in effect is starting to wear off and people want to cash out their equity. But it would be good for the state of California if their housing expenses didn't go up by more than 6% every single year like they did during the 2010s.
Yeah.
Like that would just make it easier for people to move there and have stability. But yeah, when you get stable home values, it means that you're not seeing that investment value anymore. So, and there are definitely people who have a vested interest in that investment value going up. So that's my prediction. But yeah, I admittedly there are many forces at play that could stop that from coming true.
Yeah, for sure. That's a really interesting potential view of the future and how things might shift. I think it's I'd like to explore that angle because we've had the last decade has been the last 15 years has been such a boom for housing, and every year rates going lower like just drove so much and so many assumptions about how normal it is to have that condition.
Yeah, for sure. Like I think historically home values go up 1% faster than inflation after you take out the cost of maintenance, which is a very modest but good. I mean, 1%'s not bad. It's better than putting your money in cash or anything else.
Yeah,
but
it
it's not
compounds,
like,
right? It is a compounding win year after year.
yeah. But
Yeah,
it's not what people have gotten used to in the last 15 years.
Right, for sure. Wow, that's really interesting. Are there other things that that maybe the headlines are getting wrong right now? Do you have a view? Like you go, oh, I wish people would be talking about this.
Well, I mean, I just wish people would talk more about the housing shortage in general. Like, just because home values aren't going up right now doesn't mean the shortage has been addressed. If anything, we're just like setting ourselves up for another problem with the shortage because construction is down and we have these climate challenges that make it more expensive to build new homes and to maintain existing homes. So, yeah, I think I wish there was just more focus on addressing the housing shortage. And from the administration, too, because I think that was something that both candidates during the election talked about, but we haven't really seen real solutions put forward on that recently.
Yeah. So, and you think of the shortage as really we build too few homes and we have been building too few homes. And that is one of the things that's contributed it to unaffordability.
But the real like epicenter of the problem is that there aren't enough homes in the places that have the most job opportunities where you don't have to commute for like an hour to get to that job opportunity every day. So it's I think like narrowing it down that way kind of shows you where we really need to be focusing our efforts. That's why I'm not like such a fan of building on federal land, for example, because it's just not in those locations typically where people most want to live, where they can actually have a job that offsets their cost of housing along with their other living costs like transportation. So that's what I would want to see more movement on specifically.
And have you seen any places that you think are doing well on that, like thinking about like better legislation or opening things up? You have.
Well, I mean, Chicago, I feel like every time I live just 2 hours outside of Chicago, and I can take the train in from just 30 minutes away from where I live. And every single stop on the train into Chicago has dense housing on the train line. So I think that's the kind of thing I want to see more of, is more trains and more multifamily housing along those transportation stops. Because yeah, if you can live like 40 miles outside of Chicago and take the train in and have really affordable housing where you live, but still have access to jobs, that's the kind of best of both worlds.
Yeah, for sure. That's excellent. Well, Daryl, it's been an hour already. It's really terrific having the conversation. Like I said, I love the book. Hate the Game is the name of the book. Encourage everybody to read it. Thank you for joining us today. I will. You do a lot of writing. You do a lot of social media stuff. So where should people find you to like watch what you're talking about?
I'm on like all the social media platforms. My handle is usually at Fairweather PhD, although on Blue Sky it's at hatethegamebook.com because of the way their domains work. I'm also on Instagram and TikTok and LinkedIn and all of that. So you can find me really anywhere. Or yeah. And if you go to my website, hatethegamebook.com, there are links to my socials too.
Yeah, socials as well. Great. Well, we'll put links in the show notes. It was a terrific conversation. I appreciate your insights and the stories in the book. Thank you for joining us, everybody. This is the Top of Mind podcast. If you enjoyed our conversation with Daryl and want to help other people find it, I appreciate a few links in the comments, a few stars in the ratings wherever you get your podcast. That helps everyone else find us. And we will be back again very soon with another episode. Thanks, everyone.